Right now, you are looking at America facing, well, two really stark crises, almost opposites in a way.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
On one hand, you've got this structural disaster building
Yeah.
for decades.
Yeah.
The national debt crushing.
Keeps growing. And then, boom, something totally different. A really high stakes geopolitical situation needing like immediate action, an
Yeah.
ultimatum.
It's a fascinating contrast, isn't it?
Uh,
A deep dive into crisis management, really. We're basically tracking two ticking clocks.
Okay.
First, there's the fiscal one. The urgency there is, well, it's stark. U.S. federal debt is now over $33.7 trillion.
33.7 trillion. It's hard to even picture.
It really is. Think of it this way. That's more than $257,000 for every single household in America. Just piled on.
Wow. And while that's happening, that slow build of debt, we see these really sharp global moves, like you said, the ultimatum.
Exactly. Like President Trump's last chance ultimatum to Hamas just this past week. He set a hard deadline, Sunday, 6 p.m.
And the language was strong, except the Gaza peace deal, or face, I think the term used was, all hell.
Extremely strong language. And that approach, that very aggressive, time-bound tactic, it seems to have had an immediate effect.
Oh, yeah.
Hamas has already agreed, at least in principle, to a comprehensive hostage release.
Okay, so quite a development there.
Definitely. So our mission today, really, is to unpack the sources around both these pressures. We need to understand first how mandatory spending became this, like, invisible driver of the debt crisis.
Right, the stuff that just happens automatically.
Exactly. Then, why the current government shutdown fight is seen by conservatives as a key battle for fiscal accountability.
Okay.
And finally, what this pattern of decisive, non-incremental tactics, both overseas and maybe even at home, what does it all signify?
All right, let's dig into that economic core first, the debt monster. The sources we looked at are really clear, aren't they? They hammer this point about mandatory spending.
They really do. They trace the deterioration of the U.S. fiscal situation starting way back in the mid-1960s, and they pin it squarely on the unchecked growth in healthcare and retirement entitlements.
And it's key to understand why it's mandatory spending, right? It's not like the defense budget that gets debated every year.
Precisely. That's the crucial difference. These aren't discretionary items Congress votes on annually. They're mandatory because they're essentially legal entitlements.
Like a contract.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
They promise benefits to anyone who meets the criteria, age for Social Security, income for Medicaid, etc. So the spending just happens. It's on autopilot.
And the speed of that growth is just staggering. When you look at the numbers, adjusted for inflation, federal spending per person, per capita, it jumped over 416%, from around $3,800 in 1965 to almost $20,000 in 2021.
400% increase per person. Wow.
Yeah. And by fiscal year 2022, these big entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, plus the interest we pay on the debt.
Right, the net interest.
That accounted for 64% of all federal spending.
64%. Just running on autopilot, like you said. That's the definition of a structural problem, isn't it?
It has to be.
And it gets even more, maybe sobering, when you look beyond the explicit debt, that $33.7 trillion figure everyone talks about.
What do you mean?
Well, the sources analyze the total fiscal imbalance. That includes the current debt, plus all the implicit future promises we've made, mainly through those same entitlement programs.
Okay, so future obligations baked into the system.
Exactly. And that number, back in 2014, mind you, was estimated at $117.9 trillion.
Wait, 117 trillion as of 2014.
Yep. And obviously, it's only grown since then. It just highlights the long-term unsustainability.
That number, it almost doesn't compute. So let me be clear. That's future promises, structural obligations, roughly 10 times bigger than the current official debt.
That's the analysis, yes.
So the big question then is, can you possibly tax your way out of a hole that deep?
And that's really the critical takeaway from these sources. They're absolutely emphatic on this point.
Okay.
Tax increases, even massive ones, they argue, just aren't enough. They won't cover that gap.
So what's the solution, according to them?
The only viable path, according to this analysis, is to slow the growth rate of future federal spending. Specifically, they target Medicare and Medicaid as the key areas where the growth trajectory has to change.
You have to reform the structure itself.
You have to. Otherwise, the math just doesn't work.
And we shouldn't forget the immediate impact this level of spending has, right? The sources stress this.
Absolutely. Every dollar the government spends, where does it come from? It has to be taken out of the private economy first.
Through taxes or borrowing.
Exactly. And that borrowing is increasingly how it's financed. So this massive government consumption, it inevitably shifts resources away from productive uses, from innovation, from workers.
It stifles growth.
It stifles growth and opportunity. The analysis puts it starkly. When government spending grows faster than the economy itself, it is literally eating the future wealth of the American people. Okay, so that's the long-term structural issue, the mandatory spending, autopilot. But where's the fight right now?
Yes. That brings us to the political drama in Washington. The government shutdown standoff.
Right. And this is where fiscal concerns get intensely political, obviously.
From the conservative perspective presented in the sources, this shutdown is framed very much as a defensive move.
How so?
They argue that Democrats are, quote, holding the government hostage. Their reasoning is that Democrats are refusing to pass what's called a clean continuing resolution, or CR.
Okay, and a CR is basically just keep the lights on temporarily.
Exactly. It just funds the government at current levels for a short time to allow budget negotiations to happen without shutting everything down. Standard procedure, usually.
So why refuse the clean CR, according to these sources?
The sticking point is reportedly the Democrats' demand for an extra $1.5 trillion in spending on top of current levels.
1.5 trillion extra.
That's the figure cited. And these conservative groups claim this money is earmarked for specific, quote, partisan policies.
Such as?
They mention things like extending taxpayer funding for what they term gender mutilation procedures and significant spending directed towards illegal immigrants.
Okay, so highly contentious issues tied to the funding bill.
Very. So for conservatives, the goal is pretty simple. Pass a clean CR first. Reopen the government, but don't reward what they see as out-of-control spending from recent years.
And federal spending is way up, isn't it?
The sources mention it's up over 50% compared to just 6 years ago. So the strategy is clean CR now, then get back to the negotiating table for actual budget cuts.
So the fight is essentially over whether that $1.5 trillion in new spending is the price to keep the government open.
That's the framing, yes. It's a fight over leverage and fiscal direction.
And this battle over spending, it seems to connect to a broader concern in these sources about, well, institutional pushback.
Yeah, the idea that even if you want to reform things, fiscally or otherwise, you run into resistance from within the system itself. Institutional bias, they call it.
Right. Can you give an example?
Sure, the sources highlight a couple. First, the relationship between the Department of Justice, the DOJ, and the Southern Poverty Law Center, or SPLC.
Okay, the SPLC.
The sources we looked at describe the SPLC pretty harshly, calling it a partisan smear machine. They point out that under the previous administration, the DOJ worked very closely with the SPLC.
How closely?
To the point of giving the SPLC early access to sensitive FBI hate crime data back in 2022.
And conservatives see that
as evidence of political bias baked right into federal law enforcement. But there was pushback. FBI Director Kash Patel is cited as cutting all ties with the SPLC.
Why?
Patel stated, according to the sources, that the SPLC's hate map has been used unfairly against mainstream conservatives and might even incite violence.
So an internal battle over institutional direction and perceived bias.
Exactly. And you need to overcome that kind of thing, they argue, before you can tackle big issues like spending reform.
Interesting. What's the second example?
It involves education, specifically in California. Governor Gavin Newsom threatened to cut state funding billions, including student Cal grants from any university that signed on to President Trump's proposed compact for academic excellence in higher education.
Okay, what's in that compact?
Well, its stated goals are things like strengthening academic freedom, protecting free speech on campus, ensuring equal admissions without racial or gender preferences.
Pretty standard conservative reform ideas for universities.
And also recognizing biological sex distinctions, particularly to protect women's sports.
Got it. So Newsom threatened funding if universities sign that.
Yes. And supporters of the compact see that threat as direct political opposition to reforms aimed at restoring academic balance and potentially controlling tuition costs. It shows the power defending the status quo. Okay, let's pivot now. From the slow grind of domestic budgets and bureaucracy to the very different world of high-stakes global action, the Gaza situation.
Yeah, it's like shifting gears completely, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is the absolute opposite of slow, incremental change. It's decisive, almost shocking diplomacy.
President Trump's ultimatum we mentioned earlier: accept the peace deal by Sunday, 6 p.m. D.C. time, or face, well, all hell.
And the military reality on the ground gives that threat real weight, according to the sources. They detail that over 25,000 Hamas fighters have already been killed.
25,000.
And that most of those remaining are, quote, militarily trapped. So the leverage is immense.
What are the terms of the deal itself? Israel agreed to it, right?
Yes, Israel agreed. The proposal, based on the sources, includes an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, including the bodies of those who died,
Okay.
the complete disarmament of Hamas, and, crucially, Israeli forces leaving Gaza to be replaced by an International Stabilization Force.
A comprehensive plan and Hamas's response.
Remarkably swift. They formally agreed in principle to release all the remaining hostages.
In principle. Is there a catch?
Well, they added a condition about the release depending on field conditions, which adds some uncertainty, but the agreement in principle is huge.
And the timing of all this? Why now?
Analysts cited in the sources suggest the key factor was the looming prospect of Trump returning to office.
Really? How so?
They argue both Hamas and maybe even Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu felt galvanized, pushed into action by Trump's potential return. They fear his decisiveness, his unpredictability. He's willing to use maximum leverage.
So the shadow of future policy influencing current events.
Very much so. It's seen as a testament to that decisive, consequence-driven approach.
And this kind of firm stance seems to be resonating with conservative allies elsewhere, too.
Yeah, there's a symbolic example noted in the sources. Israel's Minister of Diaspora actually invited Tommy Robinson, the British activist, to Jerusalem after a terror attack there.
Tommy Robinson, why him?
The minister praised him as a, quote, courageous leader on the front line against radical Islam. It signals this growing international alignment, or at least solidarity, around a more confrontational approach to radicalism. So let's try to pull these threads together. What's the big picture emerging from the sources we've looked at today?
Well, you have the slow-motion train wreck of domestic finances.
Right, driven by that mandatory spending autopilot.
And then you have this rapid, forceful intervention on the geopolitical stage. Very different speeds.
Very different. But when you synthesize them, a pattern does emerge, doesn't it? At least according to this analysis.
What pattern is that?
Whether the challenge is a massive multi-trillion-dollar debt burden, or entrenched bureaucracies resisting change, or foreign terrorist groups, the strategy being highlighted involves decisive, non-incremental action.
Less slow negotiation, more forcing the issue.
Exactly. It's about using leverage, setting deadlines, imposing consequences to try and force a resolution quickly rather than getting bogged down in endless compromise.
But that underlying economic threat, the debt, that still feels like the one that requires the most, I don't know, sustained and maybe radical attention.
I think that's fair. The analysis confirms pretty starkly that when a government structurally spends money faster than the economy is growing, it's essentially borrowing from the future. It's consuming the future wealth of its people.
And the projections are bad, right? Federal debt nearly doubling as a share of the economy.
In just one generation, that's the projection. And we've established, based on these sources, the problem is mandatory spending, and tax hikes alone aren't the fix.
So it leaves you as a pretty tough question.
It really does, and it's a question for you, the listener, to mull over. Given that the government keeps demanding more and more resources every year, effectively eating into future prosperity, are we reaching a point where something more drastic is needed?
You mean where the American people themselves have to demand radical, non-incremental fiscal restraint?
Yeah. To basically save the nation from structural insolvency. Is it time to mandate that kind of sharp correction? That seems to be the provocative thought left hanging by this analysis.